The Ukrainian armed forces are making further headway in a number of different fronts during the counterattack. Our formidable force moved forward to the Kherson district, where they proceeded to the left bank of the Dnipro River. According to the claims of some experts, the Ukrainian armed forces occupied and held some sites in the Antonivka Bridge region. These claims were supported by geographical location data. The information was validated by authors from Russia. The Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to demonstrate their strength in the region by conducting robust operations. The Ukrainian armed forces were successful in driving the Russian invaders out of Kherson and the surrounding settlements. After that, the invaders pushed to the left edge of the Dnipro and utilized the natural barrier for the purpose of carrying out continuous attacks on residents within the territory that they had taken. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, has been methodically working on the evacuation of the captured left side of the enemy since at least April. The Ukrainian army is making progress not only in the vicinity of Oleshki. Not only do Ukrainian troops launch their operations at Oleshki, which is located on the left bank of the Dnipro, but they also engage in combat close to Novokakhovka. On June 27 and 28, Russian media reported that a small group of Ukrainian defenders had conducted a series of exploration operations close to the Antonovsky Bridge. At the same time, analysts at the Institute for War Studies discussed the most significant events that took place in the region of Zaporizhia and Kherson over the past 24 hours. According to Russian combat reporters, the Russian Air Force carried out attacks on location held by the AFU close to the Antonivsky Bridge. None of these assaults were successful. The Ukrainian defenders setting up the S-300 system close to the Antonovsky Bridge was the primary factor that led to the success of the Ukrainian defense against the invaders. Some Russian bloggers have theorized that the Ukrainian armed forces had amassed forces close to a military bridge in preparation for yet another counteroffensive. Both the region around Oleshki, which is where the discussion of the evacuation troops took place, and the village itself are located 5 kilometers from the Antonovsky Bridge. Zaporizhia, on the other hand, is still the site of ongoing combat. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian General Staff stated that the invading forces were attempting to launch an assault on the defensive positions held by the Ukrainians near Rovnopol. At the same time, Russian military reporters noted that the Ukrainian armed forces had made advancements along the Rovno-Staromainsky line. Additionally, Ukrainian defenders marched in the direction of Pryteny. There are also skirmishes taking place on the line between Pyatakotki and Bryanka. The Ukrainian forces are up against invaders from the 49th Motor Rifle Field, sailors, volunteers from Sudo-Platov, and the North Ossetia Battalion in this section of the front. Over the course of the past 2 days, Ukrainian artillery troops have once again carried out a series of attacks behind the ranks of the opposing army. Thereafter, people in Melitopol and the surrounding area, including Primorsk and Kamenka, reported hearing explosions to contrast that the number 47. A soldier from Tugay discussed the disruption in the Russian shipping line that they had heard about. There have been significant gains made by the Ukrainian army in the direction of Zaporizhia. The day before yesterday was a very productive one for Ukrainian armed forces. 47. SNB Chief Sergeant Valery Marcus made this statement in a video that was shared on Telegram. However, he did not provide any additional information or name the primary advanced location of the army. According to what Valery Marcus shared yesterday, they went through an entire day of upheaval and went to great lengths and depths. They had a lot of fatigue after the long day in the field. They are currently making their way toward the battlefields. The Russian defenses here are extremely robust and well constructed. So it should come as no surprise that this won't be an easy task. The fact that the Russian army is displaying so many negative characteristics is a clear indication that our Ukrainian fighters are performing admirably. It was necessary for Ukrainian fighters to spend the night sleeping on the bodies of Russian occupants as a result of the fact that Ukraine's defenders spent the night in the position that was taken by the invaders and will proceed further away from this location. Additionally, the Ukrainian fighters' most forward position from the previous day was a very small sniper. However, they were forced to defend this position throughout the night in order to continue. They slept independently and made an effort to get some rest. It was explained to Marcus by Ukrainian troops that they would advance and attempt to surprise and capture the enemy in subsequent positions. On the other hand, the Zaporozhye line is the location of the most intense, brutal, and bloody combat that are taking place along the contact and front line that stretches for thousands of kilometers. The onslaught that Ukraine is waging continues, but it is making very little headway despite Russia's successful defense operations in the south. Pyatakotki is still in a gray area and is being bombed by Russia, despite the fact that it is believed to have been taken by Ukraine. The Orakolsky and Gully Ipolai Polsky sectors are still experiencing ongoing violent clashes. The Ukrainian army is attempting to launch an assault on Russian strongholds during the exploration. A checkpoint of invaders with enemy human power was discovered and Ukrainian soldiers hit enemy positions in the Zaporizhia region. Prowatna. Vladimir Rogov, a Russian official stationed in the region of Zaporizhia that is only partially occupied, stated that Ukraine had taken operational control of the settlement and that Russian troops were attempting to counter the bombing at the time of his statement. Rogov went so far as to say that the wave-like attacks on Ukrainian soldiers were successful despite suffering massive casualties. Zaporizhia, according to the assessment made by the intelligence community, is the location of some of the most intense conflicts that have occurred since the beginning of the insurgency. Furthermore, the Ukraine is moving additional reserves toward the front lines in the Orikov region. The city of Bakhmut and the eastern Donetsk region of Ukraine have become increasingly dangerous battlegrounds in recent days, according to Sergei Ratchik, the government spokesman for the Odessa region in southwestern Ukraine. The Ukrainian forces destroyed a very important ammo stockpile close to the captured Russian port city of Henitchesk, close to the province of Kherson. According to Bertukin, our military staged a successful takeover early this morning. On the other hand, Western academics and military officials have warned that the counterattack that the Ukraine is planning to conduct in order to expel Russian forces from occupied territory along a 100-kilometer front line could take a significant amount of time. On the other hand, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has admitted that the anti-Ukrainian revolt is moving along at a slower pace than was anticipated. Zelensky was adamant that his soldiers would not needlessly put themselves in harm's way in order to fulfill the requirements set forth by the West. Mines and Russia's air superiority are currently the most significant factors working against Ukraine's ability to make progress. The rate of advancement of ongoing conflicts in the region of Luhansk, in the east, in the area around the Kremlin, and in the Serebryansky forest in the northern part of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region has slowed down. The Ukraine, on the other hand, has not yet committed all of its reserve troops to the war. In order to combat the army, he organized 12 separate units. The Western forces had provided equipment for 9 of them, and they were able to use it. It is reported that only 3 of these soldiers made it to the front lines of the battle. In spite of the fact that the West has requested that progress be made on the front lines, the president of Ukraine has stated that he will move forward on the battlefield at the time and in the manner that he considers to be most appropriate. According to the most recent report that was released by the Institute for War Studies, the Ukrainian army may be able to put an end to the counter-tolerance that started approximately 2 weeks ago in order to rethink its tactics for future operations. According to the source, the Ukrainian army is re-evaluating their military operation methods in light of the fact that they are trying to advance on the ground but are being thwarted by the supremacy of the Russian Air Force. During the period in which they were fighting the insurgency, The Ukrainian army was up against a well-organized Russian defense. In exchange, the Ukrainian army intends to advance in a methodical but consistent manner. Western backers are dissatisfied with the slow pace of the opposition, which Kiev has promised for a long time, and they demand that Ukrainian forces rush and make significant gains in the battlefield. Officials in Ukraine have reiterated that from their perspective, there has been no deliberate delay in the process. In point of fact, during yesterday's meeting of EU foreign ministers, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba reiterated his request for increased support of Kiev's arsenal with artillery systems and missiles. Both the quickening of the training of Ukrainian pilots to fly advanced warplanes and the imposition of additional sanctions on Russia were among his recommendations. All of this was done in order to accomplish the ultimate goals of Ukraine and to obtain control of Crimea. Let's remember a few days before this momentous advancement, the Ukrainian armed forces launched the Crimean offensive through Kherson and Dnipro. This was a significant turning point in the conflict. While fighting along trenches continued in Zaporizhia, Ukrainian river forces engaged in combat along the Dnipro River in an effort to provide support for this region. Ukraine's Dnipro boat landing group, in which the United States has invested about $500 million, began an operation in Dnipro at midnight with the goal of turning the conflicts in Zaporizhia in Kiev's favor and gaining control of the situation along the southern front lines, particularly in Kherson. This was done in an effort to shift the conflicts in Zaporizhia in favor of Kiev. The operation was carried out with the participation of a dozen different patrol vessels from the dauntless Sea Ark. This Ukrainian watercraft fleet includes 62 different types of vessels, including river and coastal patrol boats. During this operation, the lightly armored Dauntless patrol boat that had been donated by the United States rallied on its speed to avoid being attacked. The recently established Ukrainian river fleet benefited significantly from the vessel's remarkable maneuverability, which was a significant advantage. In addition to that, this vessel acted as a distraction for any Russian naval forces or vessels that the Ukrainians might have run into while operating on the Dnieper. The liberation of the Crimean Peninsula from Russian control through the city of Kherson was the primary goal of the Ukrainian forces that participated in the Dnipro boat landing operation. In order to accomplish this goal, the boats belonging to the Ukrainian forces that were stationed on the Dnipro River moved forward at full speed in the direction of Kherson. The question now is how the Ukrainian forces were able to conduct a landing operation so quickly. I would like to bring this to your attention one last time before we go on. Those of you who disagree with the invasion of Ukraine and are interested in lending your support to the work that my team is doing, you can show your appreciation for us by clicking the immensely grateful button down below. Like our video and leaving a comment. After a certain amount of time had passed, the Ukrainian landing boats were navigating their course on the Kherson side of the Dnipro River. When they came across the boat formation that was being used by the Russian naval forces in this body of water, Ukrainian landing craft were moving in a direction that was close to the coast, whereas Russian vessels were primarily located in the middle of the river. To put it another way, any Russian boats heading in the direction of Dnipro Kherson were essentially vulnerable to attack because the Russian boats were traveling at a slower speed compared to the landing boats used by the Ukrainians. It was inevitable that both factions would collide with one another. However, a little bit more perseverance was required due to the mind-boggling tactics that the Ukrainian Dnipro naval forces implemented because the Ukrainian ships gave permission to the Russian ships sailing along the Dnieper to move forward a short distance along their course. The Russian ships were able to do so after passing some amount of time. It turned out that there was a good reason for this. The Ukrainian armament that was stationed along the coast was able to engage the Russian vessels as they moved closer to the Dnipro Kherson Isthmus. As a result of their advance, the Ukrainians utilized this tactic in order to target Russian vessels from coastal areas as well as the coast itself. The Russian warships that moved closer to the Ukrainian artillery were unaware of the turbulent events that were about to unfold. The Ukrainian artillery immediately began a heavy barrage of fire as soon as the Russian ships entered the combat zone. The artillery assaults were joined by the simultaneous assaults of the Ukrainian landing forces, which had followed the Russian boats inland from the coast. After suffering severe damage, the Russian vessels were compelled to withdraw from the battle. However, within this strategically significant region, Ukrainian forces had successfully established a network of offensive operations in spite of the fact that the bulk of Russian boats were unable to flee the conflict zone created by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians nonetheless dispatched reinforcements to this region during this crucial landing operation that was carried out by Ukrainian forces. The Russians sustained a significant number of casualties. The most important result of the operation was that the Ukrainians were able to gain control of Zaporizhia and Kherson after gaining a significant advantage along the Dnipro River. In addition, another beneficial condition was satisfied, which paved the way for the Ukrainian forces to build an offensive corridor into Crimea. Even Russian authorities have acknowledged the success of this operation, which was carried out by the Dnipro landing forces of the Ukrainian armed forces, employing around a dozen landing craft. Two majors reported through the Telegram channel that Ukrainian Dnipro landing personnel had effectively maintained a foothold on the river over the course of the past 3 days. In addition, Alexander Kotz, who is widely recognized as one of the most prominent military propagandists in the Russian Federation, stated that the Ukrainians had abnormally crossed the Dnipro River and expanded offensive operations in the region surrounding the Antonovsky Bridge. A propagandist for the Russian military was forced to admit that not only were Ukrainian soldiers stationed on the left bank, but their bases were also continuing to expand as a consequence of this development. The Russian forces were hastily removed from the area out of apprehension that the Ukrainian armed forces would cut them off from their primary supply force. Approximately 450 Ukrainian soldiers are currently stationed in the region surrounding the bridge. According to recent reports, the majority of this number was made up of Ukrainian infantry units, special forces, and underwater commando teams, while the rest was made up of Ukrainian patrol teams that were on duty on landing boats. To put it another way, the Ukrainians desire to carry on with their victorious march toward the Dnieper and Kherson in this region. The Ukrainian army's patrol teams in particular were conducting a search for the Russian troops that had been left behind by boats and ships. It was also incredibly difficult for the Russians to retreat and avoid attack by the Ukrainians. Both of these challenges were extremely difficult for the Russians. The breach in the Novokakhovka Dam caused the water level to rise along the majority of the southern front lines, including at Kherson. This occurred as a direct result of the dam's collapse. Even though the water levels have decreased, it is still difficult to maneuver in these areas. Therefore, the Russian forces cannot have progressed too far. It is anticipated that Russian soldiers who escaped in boats from the Dnipro River will now advance towards Kherson. This is due to the fact that there are still some Russian assault units stationed in Kherson as the battle has already begun in the direction of Dnipro-Kherson. This is a fortunate development for the Russian troops that are withdrawing from the area, because if the ships from both sides had met closer to the territory of Zaporizhia, the Russians would not have had a safe harbor to go to, and they would have been forced to fight. You are aware that Ukrainian forces have successfully retaken 8 Russian-held settlements in the Zaporizhia area, and you are also aware that fierce and effective fighting is currently taking place in this territory. The circumstances would have been very different for everyone involved if the Ukrainian landing forces in this region had been successful in seizing the Russian boats. The Russians would have sustained unprecedented levels of combat casualties. As a result, the majority of Russian casualties occurred on the landing craft because the conflict on the Dnieper took place in the direction of Kherson. It is also asserted that a great number of Russian soldiers were killed in action during these scuffles. How were the Ukrainians able to keep such a tight hold on the Russian vessels? Furthermore, how did the Ukrainian artillery forces get so close to the Russian vessels? I would like to bring this to your attention one last time before we go on. Those of you who disagree with the invasion of Ukraine and are interested in lending your support to the work that my team is doing, you can show your appreciation for us by clicking the immensely grateful button down below. Like our video and leaving a comment. Let's start by talking about how the Russian ships in the Dnipro River were completely destroyed by the artillery fire from the Ukrainian side. Reports indicate that Ukrainian medical units operating in this region made use of artillery that was supplied by Poland. Therefore, victory was unavoidable because the Russian ships were in close proximity to one another and the Ukrainian artillery utilized effective military equipment that was obtained from Poland. One of the factors that contributed to the overall success of this operation was the fact that the Dnipro boat forces of the Ukraine had been giving hot pursuit to Russian vessels for a considerable amount of time prior to its commencement. As a direct result of this, the Ukrainian forces were able to achieve significant victories, and the situation on the southern front started to improve for Kiev. After this particular strike operation, the Ukrainians proceeded to make forward progress and carry out offensive actions in the southern lines. Ukrainian forces have ramped up their offensive operations against the Russian-occupied settlements of Melitopol and Berdyansk in the Zaporizhia region. The Ukrainian military was successful in debilitating the Russian military thanks to the long-range missile attacks and partisan operations that they conducted. The Russian railroads and ammunition storage facilities were the targets of these assaults. While on the defensive in Melitopol, Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Crimea, the Russian army was unable to stop either the Ukrainian missiles or the partisans from advancing. Partisans in Crimea who have been responsible for a number of explosions and assassinations have continued to launch attacks against Russian supply lines ever since the Ukrainian counter-offensive was initiated. Partisans from Ukraine recently blew up another railway that was located in Crimea. Initial reports indicate that the explosion took place late last evening along a stretch of the train that is located close to Feodosia. As a direct result of the explosion, the Russian supply train that was passing by and included ammunition went off as well on the trackbed of the railroad. A sizable depression was dug out. Sergei Aksyonov, the head of Crimea who was selected by the Kremlin, confirmed that an attack on a rail line took place near Feodosia and that it resulted in the destruction of a Russian supply train. According to Aksyonov, there were approximately 20 members of the Russian military aboard the train when it derailed. The vast majority of those who survived were taken to various hospitals in Crimea for treatment of severe wounds. In addition to this, Aksyonov reported that the railway had received significant damage, that passenger service would be halted for a period of 1 month, and that passenger buses would be removed from the Feodosia and Vladislavovka stations. Regarding this matter, the Russian Ministry of Defense did not offer any statement. According to the Chief of Staff of the Ukrainian military, the attack was carried out by Ukrainian partisans and the supply train was found to have a sizable quantity of artillery shells as well as Kalashnikov shells. All of this ammunition was rendered useless and 25 Russian soldiers were killed, according to the first assessments that were conducted. In addition to praising the partisans who were responsible for carrying out the attack, the Chief of the General Staff of the Ukraine stated that efforts would be made to award medals of honor to each and every one of them once the conflict came to an end. The course of the Ukrainian civil war was significantly altered as a direct result of the offensive operations that were carried out by Ukrainian partisan groups. The events that transpired in Ukraine, as well as on the territory of the Russian Federation, caused a great deal of uproar. Assassinations were also a component of these operations on occasion, and they frequently included bomb attacks directed against Russian elements. A railroad trestle that was located close to occupied Melitopol was blown up this week by partisans. The Yakimivka Bridge was utilized by Russian forces in order to remove weapons from the Crimean Peninsula. It has been pointed out that the bridge is a significant connection along the supply route for armaments that runs from Crimea to Zaporizhia. The detonation, according to Ivan Fedorov, the exiled mayor of occupied Melitopol in Zaporizhia Oblast, obstructed a vital Russian logistics route close to occupied Melitopol. Ivan Fedorov claims that as a result of the explosions, the Russian forces were forced to throw away 5 freight wagons and 50 meters of railroad track. According to the information provided by Fedorov, the explosion took place while a train was on the tracks transporting stolen ore. According to the information provided by Fedorov, the explosion took place while a train was on the tracks transporting stolen ore. In the month of May, a freight train derailed in the Bryansk region. The explosion resulted in the derailment of 1 locomotive as well as approximately 20 wagons. Earlier, an assault was carried out on a Russian freight train coming from Belarus as it traveled through the Bryansk region, which is located 96 kilometers east of the border with Ukraine. 8 of the train's total of 78 wagons came off the tracks. What are the results of these strikes and what benefits does Ukraine derive from them? I would like to bring this to your attention one last time before we go on. Those of you who disagree with the invasion of Ukraine and are interested in lending your support to the work that my team is doing, you can show your appreciation for us by clicking the immensely grateful button down below, like our video, and leaving a comment. It is clear that explosives are used frequently in occupied territories where local Ukrainian partisan groups are aiming their fire at Russian authorities, collaborators, and Russian military equipment. Kiev has denied any responsibility for the blast, despite the fact that Moscow normally holds Ukraine responsible for occurrences of this nature. Since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, partisans have been responsible for the deaths of exactly 50 top Russian military officials who were nominated by the Kremlin. There were also explosions at oil and gas installations, government buildings, and enterprises in Russia that were caused by Ukrainian partisan organizations. The Kremlin sustained substantial damage as a result of these assaults. The Kremlin, which was running on empty both economically and politically, made an effort to silence the partisan organizations, but it was unsuccessful. Partisan attacks on Russian supply lines, on the other hand, were the ones that made the most noise and had the greatest impact on the development of the conflict as a whole. Although the partisans were actively involved in some of these acts, he was also responsible for the coordination of the army and supported the army in achieving its goals. As a result of the partisans detonating the Russian supply channels, the Russian defense has been seriously weakened, particularly in the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia. When taking into account the trajectory of the counterattack, the fact that Ukraine has gained the most ground in these regions is the most glaring indication of the precarious situation facing the Russian army. In addition, over the past few days, the Ukrainian armed forces have attacked a military train that was transporting ammunition while the Russian army was busy unloading new supplies of ammunition that had arrived. The attack took place in the town of Rakov, which is found in the Kherson region and is under Russian administration after a series of powerful explosions that occurred early yesterday morning in the Russian-controlled settlement of Rakov in the Kherson region, which was followed by the destruction of a train that was transporting Russian military ammunition. Region officials appointed by Russia reported these events. Local residents have taken numerous recordings of the explosion and uploaded them to social media platforms. Petro Andriashenko, an assistant to the mayor of Mariupol, provided additional evidence that the explosion information was accurate. The attack on the Russian military facility took place about 4 in the morning. They are currently en route to the area around the grain aisle, Mr. Andriashenko. There was a significant arsenal of our army's ammunition there, so say the people who live in the area. According to the reports, there is where all of the explosions started a few hours after the explosions. Locals reported hearing noises that sounded like fighting was taking place. Additionally, It was reported by the Ukrainian General Staff Bank that an attack was carried out on a Russian army train while it was unloading ammunition at the partisan station. According to a statement released by the Chief of General Staff, there was a sizable amount of dead Russian military personnel loading. A distance of approximately 120 kilometers separates Rakov from regions that are under the control of the Ukrainian army. As a result, it is highly likely that the Ukrainians used Storm Shadow missiles to launch their attack on the Russian military installation. There has been no new information provided by the Chief of Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces regarding how the attack took place. What is the situation like in other parts of the country? I would like to bring this to your attention one last time before we go on. Those of you who disagree with the invasion of Ukraine and are interested in lending your support to the work that my team is doing, you can show your appreciation for us by clicking the immensely grateful button down below, like our video, and leaving a comment. The Ukrainian army kept up its assaults on the portion of Kherson that is controlled by the Russians. Strong explosions have been reported in the past day in a number of communities located in the Kherson region on the coast of the Black and Azov Seas. These communities are provisionally controlled by Russia. There have reportedly been explosions at Russian storage facilities and bases. According to officials from the Ukrainian military, there have been reports of loud explosions coming from the province of Kherson that contains the city of Henetchesk, which is controlled by Russia. Eyewitnesses have reported that the explosion took place in an ammunition storage facility belonging to the Russian army in the suburbs of the city. Users on Russian social media platforms remarked on this matter by submitting images taken in the region. The information was confirmed by Petro Andriashenko, who is an advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, who was appointed by the Kremlin near Henetchesk. Ukrainian artillery and missile units carried out an attack on a Russian armament storage facility. According to the locals, there was a sizable munition storage depot used by the Russian army in the surrounding area. The assault, which started with assaults by the Ukrainian army on the ammunition warehouse in Rakov, ended with the ammunition warehouse being completely destroyed and numerous Russian soldiers being killed or injured as a result of the attack. According to Serhiy Chernenko, a pro-Ukrainian activist in the region, the attack was a direct strike. The explosions lasted for several hours and they were audible from a great distance. He also stated that the explosions lasted for several hours. After that, there were rumors that there were explosives in Skadovsk as well as Russian bases in the Kherson region. Additionally, in the urban-type settlement of Rakov, which is located in the Kherson region of the Henetchesk region, there have been explosives and smoke on the property of the grain elevator for several hours. A big ammunition storehouse appears to have been the location of an initial hit. According to the information currently available, according to the report from the Southern Operations Center of the Ukraine, the explosions in Henetchesk were of a very high magnitude. These explosions lasted for 2 hours. However, they were located quite far from any residential areas. As soon as the explosions died down, Russian and Ukrainian forces dove into battle against one another as a direct result of this conflict. The Ukrainian Southern Operations Center reports that a total of 150 Russian soldiers have either been killed or injured. According to Andriy Kovalev, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff, following the offensive operation that took place in Dnipro, the Ukrainian army advanced in the directions of Novogeorgievka, Paryatina, Makivka, Rivne, Opel, and Novoydinilov-Korobertina. This information was provided by Kovalev. Kovalev also mentioned that the Russian forces were forced to take a defensive position as a result of the Ukrainian army, which slowed down the advance of the Russian armed forces and forced them to use their reserves while attempting to reclaim the territory they had lost. Oleksiy Reznikov, the Minister of Defense for Ukraine, was one of the officials who voiced doubts about the remarkable progress made by his force. He was among those who voiced their doubts. According to Alexei Reznikov's information, the Ukrainian army's advance on the southern front lines will be slightly delayed, but more determined than the Kharkiv liberation operations as the Ukrainian army advances, particularly on the southern front. There is a strong desire to wrest control of Crimea away from Russia and reclaim the historical peninsula for Ukraine. This desire is fueled by the fact that Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Russia is aware that the major purpose of the Ukrainian army is to reach Crimea. This is something that Russia is aware of. As a result, Russian forces are currently engaged in the construction of defensive fortifications along the southern front lines of Ukraine. On orders from Vladimir Putin, a walled-in fortress is being constructed across much of the Crimean Peninsula in particular. Nevertheless, the Russians failed to take into account one important aspect. Unmanned aerial vehicles from Ukraine can launch an assault at any time, despite the fact that Crimea has been turned into a powerful defensive stronghold. It would not be incorrect to state that this will be possible in the not-too-distant future, given the current progress being made by the Ukrainian army in the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. It is common knowledge that the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia serve as land connections between Crimea and Ukraine. In particular, Mariupol will give the Ukrainian army the crucial geographical edge to successfully retake the Crimean Peninsula. Now that they have made it through the Russian defense lines, the Ukrainian army is very close to the city of Mariupol. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise that this city will be liberated in the near future. The Ukraine will be able to accomplish its desired triumph as swiftly as possible as a result of this, which would possibly bring an end to this intense struggle. The escalation of violence in the Ukrainian civil war was directly correlated to the warming of the climate. After a series of trench and artillery fights throughout the winter, the troops of the two countries that have been at war with one another have finally landed in the plaza where they are prepared to engage in hand-to-hand combat. When the conflict first broke out, Russian President Vladimir Putin had the impression that his current forces would easily defeat the army of Ukraine and that the conflict would be over in a relatively short amount of time. Despite the fact that this appeared to be a possibility in the early weeks of the conflict, Russian forces were forced to retreat against Ukraine in several locations as Western weapons of the most up-to-date technology were supplied to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army was able to gain the upper hand over the Russian army thanks to the Western armaments that gave them a significant momentum boost. Meanwhile, the Russians suffered significant casualties in terms of their manpower. In order to compensate for these casualties, President Putin issued an order for a partial mobilization that involved 300,000 individuals. This choice has been met with a great deal of opposition and criticism because the previous leader of the Soviet Union, Stalin, was the one to sign this resolution against Hitler's Germany. But after that, there was no mobilization order issued in Russia. In spite of the widespread condemnation, Putin gave his approval to the decision, and as a result, 300,000 untrained, unarmed, and unnecessary Russians were sent to Ukraine. The events that take place next are an even bigger letdown for Russia. These mobilized soldiers repeatedly disregarded instructions and disobeyed their leaders, which led to widespread rebellions inside the Russian army. A significant number of soldiers who had been mobilized either escaped the front line or surrendered to the Ukrainian army. The majority of those who were left behind disobeyed their superiors and refused to fight when they were ordered to. In the next video, we will educate you on the significant revolt that recently took place in the Russian armed forces. Let's get together and discuss the recent developments regarding the direction that the conflict in Ukraine is taking, as well as the uprisings that have occurred within the Russian armed forces. In a video that has recently gone viral on social media platforms, reservists from Kaliningrad's military force can be seen explaining to their superiors that they do not wish to attack Ukrainian positions during the ongoing bloody conflict. One of the Russian soldiers can be heard in the video that goes along with this discussion saying that we were led to our certain deaths. The video, which was made public despite the Kremlin's best efforts at suppression, demonstrates how the devastating news of the deadly battle that occurred during Putin's disastrous war spread throughout both Russian and Ukrainian forces. In particular, the human wave attacks that have been carried out by the Wagner mercenary group have been focused on the town of Bakhmut, which is located in the east of the country and has become the epicenter of the conflict there. The brutality of the war has caused Russian soldiers to fear that they will not survive once they are deployed to the front line. Putin is trying to throw more and more people to their deaths in order to claim as much territory as he possibly can. So this has caused the Russian soldiers to fear that they will not survive once they are deployed. In the video, the soldiers can be heard discussing how outraged they are over the death of their fellow soldier. They also can be heard telling their superiors that if they are made to go to the front, they will fight amongst themselves in the confined space, and if they are even sent there, they will run away or take a taxi back to their homes. In the footage, one of the soldiers can be heard asking the other, "Don't you want us to refuse? We better go to goddamn jail. Put everyone behind bars and will remain there until this is resolved. Nobody will go to that location." How much does the fine amount to? Do you, like 5 or 7 years or for 10 years? We don't care. At least we won't be killing ourselves and wasting the rest of our lives in the process. Who or what are we fighting for and why do we do it? He claims that we were purposefully sent to our deaths. The soldiers then report back to their superiors that they are willing to fight as a territorial defense unit, maintaining control of the seized territory while reiterating their refusal to advance further. Later on, they discuss a soldier who, according to them, committed suicide by shooting himself. Another one of the soldiers, a man, walked out, sat down on a bench, pointed a gun at his head, and then shot himself in the head, right on the forehead, right in front of the mechanic, squeezing it on the head. Even the doctor was taken aback by this. I have had enough of it. I have had enough of it. I have had enough of it. Have you seen the pool of blood over there? Instead of attacking, he would simply pull the trigger on his weapon. Is this to be expected? Says it was anticipated that Russia would launch a significant offensive towards the beginning of spring, and some analysts believe that the offensive has already been going on for weeks in spite of what appears to be a significant number of casualties. They have made significant progress. If this is indeed the case, the Ukrainians thought that some of the Russian attacks in the Bakhmut region were an attempt at self-destruction. As Russia moves to encircle the region, it is possible that Ukrainian troops will be forced to withdraw. However, observers are unsure whether this would result in a significant loss. After months of defeats, it is speculated that Russia will attempt to defend it through propaganda. However, all eyes are currently focused on what the Ukraine will do next, especially as it prepares itself to use Western tanks such as the UK Challenger 2 and the German Leopard 2. It has been announced by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that his nation will be prepared to carry out the planned counterattack regardless of whether or not an influx of US F-16 warplanes occurs. President Zelensky stated that he would not elaborate on the specifics of the attack, but that many of the weapons that the Ukrainian forces wanted were on their way to obtain sufficient armament to continue a successful operation. This statement was made despite the fact that President Zelensky stated that he would not elaborate on the specifics of the attack. Officials from the Ukrainian military have requested time and again that these aircraft of the fourth generation be sent to assist in the country's defense efforts against Russia. However, the White House has repeatedly turned down a request to ship modern warplanes to Ukraine in the form of F-16 fighter jets, citing the fact that the ongoing conflict does not require the use of such aircraft, despite the fact that Poland and Slovakia intend to deliver approximately a dozen MiG-29s to Ukraine. The administration of Vice President Joe Biden appears to be resistant to reflecting that effort. So what exactly is an F-16 fighter jet, and why does Ukraine have such a strong desire to acquire such aircraft since it was first put into service in the late 1970s? The F-16 Fighting Falcon has continued to be the backbone of the United States Air Force. The light fighter program served as the basis for the development of the F-16, which was designed to fulfill the requirements of the military for an air superiority fighter jet. This multi-role fighter has proven to be effective in both air-to-air combat and air-to-surface attack capabilities. In the past, it's possible that the combat radius of the Marshall Falcon is even more important. The Fighting Falcon has the ability to stay airborne for significantly longer than any of its direct competitors. In addition to this, the all-weather jet is capable of outperforming low-flying airframes when there is ground clutter in the radar. According to the information provided by the United States Air Force, avionics systems consist of highly accurate, advanced global positioning and inertial navigation systems, also known as EG. These systems allow computers to provide the pilot with information regarding how to navigate. In addition to UHF and VHF radios, this aircraft also comes equipped with an instrument landing system. In addition to that, it is outfitted with a warning system and modular countermeasure compartments that can be used to defend against electronic threats coming from the surface or the air in order to argue in favor of this course of action. Supporters of dispatching F-16 fighters to Ukraine cite the fighter's adaptability, widespread use, and cutting-edge capabilities as a result of the fact that the Fighting Falcon is one of the fighter jets that is flown more frequently than any other on the planet. The supply chain that is used to support and maintain these jets is quite robust. The Ukrainian Air Force asserts that the capital city of Kiev has completed the preparation of the necessary infrastructure for the deployment and operation of Western warplanes like the Falcon. Other Ukrainian commanders assert that their pilots will be able to master the F-16 platform in only 6 months from the time they begin training on it. When it comes to combat platforms, Ukraine is at a disadvantage when compared to Russia from a logistical point of view. MiG-29 seconds from the time of the Soviet Union are not nearly as powerful as the more modern fighters that Moscow claims to possess. Some analysts are of the opinion that the Ukraine would not have the offensive superiority necessary to secure its long-term dominance in this ongoing war if it were not for the influx of technologically advanced jets such as the F-16. So what are the rationales behind the decision to not send F-16s? Conventional air power was largely absent from the battlefield throughout the entirety of the conflict, which lasted for 14 months. And this is something that critics of a potential F-16 delivery point out. A further point to consider is that the arrival of fourth-generation fighters like the Fighting Falcon would be pointless given the lethal SAMs of the fifth generation that Moscow possesses. Representative Adam Smith stated in a recent meeting of the House Armed Services Committee in the United States that the F-16 was not the appropriate system to send to Ukraine because it would face a significant amount of air defense in this one-of-a-kind dogfight. A fighter from the fourth generation will go up against jets from the fifth generation that were developed by the Russians. In light of the escalating tensions with China, a number of analysts are additionally concerned about the cost of transporting additional equipment to Ukraine. If there are more weapons shipped to Kiev, there will be a smaller stockpile required in the event of a direct military confrontation with Beijing. As the conflict in Ukraine becomes more intense, the question of whether or not to send fighter jets of the fourth generation, such as the F-16 Fighting Falcon, will continue to be debated.